Night was beginning to fall, a scattering of stars beginning to appear in the skies overhead, when two skiers stopped in a glade for a quick rest. Suddenly they heard a strange buzzing noise, which was coming closer and closer, which was soon joined by a bizarre object enveloped in a cloud, which began to descend right near them. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we will be discussing the fascinating case of the Imjarvi imp. Now, before we proceed, I just want to offer this disclaimer to everyone out there um, that I do my darndest to try and research pronunciations before I do videos, especially if it's, in a language which I'm unfamiliar with, in this case, Finnish. And so, again, I do my darndest, try and do my research on how to pronounce. If I am pronouncing anything wrong, I give you guys absolute carte blanche to let me know in the comments. Can't change the past of the video, but moving forward, if I ever have to say Imjarvi again, you can be sure I'll remember. So please, if I'm saying something wrong, correct me in the comments, and yeah, it's just much appreciated. But without further ado, let's get on to this case. This case occurred January 7th, 1970, at around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and involved two men, forest worker Arno Heinonen and farm worker Esko Viljo. Both were regular skiers, and that is exactly what they were doing on this cold winter's day in the woods outside of Imjarvi, Finland. They had just skied down a small hill to pause in a glade, which was apparently their kind of typical resting point. It was already sunset at this point. A few stars were starting to come out in the sky when they heard a strange buzzing noise. This sound came closer and closer, and all at once they saw this bright light in the sky covered in what they described as a luminous fog. This thing moved across the sky, and then they claimed that it changed course, descending into the glade near the witnesses. As it came closer, they saw that it was actually this round, light gray object, about 10 feet in diameter, kind of disc shaped with a flat bottom. On the underside of this object were three half spheres, spaced equidistant from one another. And in the very center of this object, they claimed that there was this like tube or ring, which was emitting a weak light and a red gray mist, which they said smelled like sulfur. At this stage, both men felt paralyzed or stupefied, unable to move or speak. Suddenly, a very bright ball of light came from the center of the object, and it was around this time that Heinonen claimed that he felt as though something kind of grabbed him and pulled him back. So he stepped back a ways as this ball of light kind of went down to the snow, spreading out to form a 3-foot wide circle, the color of fire, and surrounded by a black ring or outline. Inside of this circle of light stood a bizarre creature. They each described this creature as standing about 3 feet tall, very spindly, with a very pale face and a long, crooked nose. They said that it looked like it was wearing overalls or coveralls of a light green, with a conical helmet which shone like metal. They said that the whole creature seemed to kind of be glowing as though, quote, it was made out of phosphor. They claimed that this being held a black box in its hands, which they described the hands as bent and kind of claw like, and wearing white gauntlets. Now, there appeared to be an opening in the box, which contained this pulsating, very bright, nearly blinding light, which this being then turned toward Heinonen. The mist returned and obscured the creature, and also began emitting sparks of various colors. They said that it seemed like these sparks were so big and so close that they were surprised that they couldn't feel them. As Viljo described it, the light beam trembled like a flame, and then kind of retracted back up into the object. The surrounding mist was, quote, thrown apart, and then when it cleared, the air was completely empty. I mean, the object, the light, the strange creature, everything was just gone. The two men stood there for 2 or 3 minutes, trying to make sense of what they had seen, when Heinonen began to feel that his right side was going numb. When he tried to walk, his right leg kind of lost strength. They said that it crumpled beneath him. Viljo had to actually help drag him back to Heinonen's home, located about 2 kilometers away from the scene. Heinonen's mother was home when they arrived and claimed that when she answered the door, she found them in just quite a state. They were nearly incoherent. Viljo's face was red and swollen, almost like he'd been burnt, and Heinonen was completely ill. They were each seen by a doctor who said that they were in shock from something and gave them each 2 sleeping pills. Although Viljo's face was severely burnt, Heinonen actually experienced more long-term effects, unable to work for more than 3 days for the remainder of the season. In spring, he improved somewhat, but still dealt with feelings of weakness. Both men claimed that in the immediate aftermath, they couldn't really remember many details of the experience, but that as time went on, they kind of picked up more of what they could remember. It was like the memories were sort of reemerging just a piece at a time. Now, the physical effects were not the only lasting part of this experience for Heinonen. In the ensuing years, he claimed a series of contacts with a pretty Finnish speaking space girl who gave him the typical contactee jargon. She and her people were their friends from outer space. They were from the other side of the Milky Way. There were three different types of humanoids. She was 180 years old. However, each time she appeared to him at a crossroads. As for the initial experience that both he and Vilja shared, on that same day, two other people came forward to say that they too had seen strange light phenomenon at a roughly the same time as the encounter near Imjarvi. Now, truth be told, this is a trippy case for a variety of reasons. Of course, we see two of my all time favorite aspects of many of these strange encounters, and that is what appears to be the initial priming of the witnesses with sound and light phenomenon. This buzzing noise is the first experience they have in this encounter, followed shortly thereafter by the lights. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I find it very interesting when you have these extremely detailed accounts of high strangeness, often with high degrees of contact between the witness and whatever the other is, which begin with a noise, typically this kind of long, droning humming or buzzing noise. I truly wonder if this is something which sets the tone quite literally for the rest of the encounter, if it does somehow prime or prepare the witness, maybe on a physiological level, even maybe on a mental, emotional, psychological level. Who knows? In this case as well, you have the very interesting concept of lights kind of wrapped in fog or a cloud. Clouds, mists, fogs, you name it. These are yet another one of those cross genre, cross field aspects of so many anomalous encounters, as well as a very strong tenet of various world mythologies where deities kind of present themselves enveloped in a cloud. It seems to be just kind of symbolic of obscurity, of being able to see but not completely see or completely grasp the image that's being presented. Strange mists are also, of course, a staple of ghost encounters where phantoms appear filmy or nebulous or cloud like, or appear to be obscured behind a mist fog, or even, sometimes a screen in cases of the banshee, a veil. True to form, too, there are a number of cryptid sightings where the creature spotted is accompanied by or surrounded by a mist, or it even looks like the mist is kind of part of the creature. A strong example of these also ties into the paralysis or stupefaction angle. A great example of that is the Van Meter visitor, this winged being spotted in Van Meter, Iowa at the turn of the last century, which was said to emit a mist and light which stupefied witnesses, much like in this case, that description of the stupefying luminous mist. On the topic of this bizarre mist, they claimed that it smelled like sulfur, a definite call out to encounters or cases which people have termed demonic or believed to be demonic. Although in his fantastic book, The Brimstone Deceit, Joshua Cutchin makes the point that this sulfuric odor kind of belongs to all sorts of creepy happenings, from UFOs to cryptids to ghosts, just all across the board, or perhaps Ouija board, I should say. However, while on the topic of the underworld, we see that in Heinenen's later encounters, he meets with this pretty humanoid female at Crossroads, the traditional haunting ground of demons and hellhounds. However, for again a less demonic approach, we see that Crossroads, as with many other such liminal or transitional places, really are the happy home of tons of anomalies, creatures of all sorts, ghosts, fairies, in modern times, UFOs and cryptids, if there really has to be any distinction at all. Now, as dreamlike or maybe nightmarish is the better term, as this encounter was, or at least appears to be, both skiers came away with their own physical souvenirs, all over themselves. The doctor who examined them felt that they may have encountered some sort of electrical phenomenon. As good a guess as any. But just imagine having this experience, which seems absolutely unbelievable. Borderline silly. You're talking about this little bizarre imp like being underneath a UFO, and coming away from it with facial burns, with light sensitivity, nausea, joint pain, consistent headaches, which is what these two people experienced. I have to wonder, although both had lasting physical effects, Heinonen came away with longer lasting effects as well as these ongoing contacts, if there is some significance to the being turning the lighted box towards him. He was also closer to the object. Now, the interesting thing is that that's not even the full extent of what he experienced. Hanan also came to, quote, fear his friend Viljo. He claimed that he had these recurring dreams where Viljo appeared small and old, almost like the being that they saw. This, as well as the gradual reemergence of memories of the event seems truly indicative of some sort of trauma. Now, the being itself is definitely worth a look. The image of it really looks like a little elf or imp. I mean, right down to the crooked nose and the pointed hat, which is not uncommon in all of these, UFO encounters. These so-called UFO occupants seem to very commonly bear a very striking resemblance to folkloric entities. Now, this whole encounter in particular of two men stopping in a glade, seeing this cloud with lights kind of descend on them, and then a small being dressed in green with a pointy hat, which shows this box of light to one of them, who then goes on to have further experiences. I mean, it truly reads like some old fairy tale. Swap out the UFO occupant with imp, black box with treasure chest, and honestly, tractor beam UFO with mushroom, and you have, instead of a UFO sighting, a folktale. On that tangent, and I just have to cover this because I've thought about it before, the classic UFO and tractor beam silhouette is so close to a mushroom, and I actually find a bit of significance to that. It might sound silly, but in the current mechanical belief system of UFOs, why do they crop up so often as mushroom shaped, egg shaped, these kind of organic motifs when we're expecting tin cans from outer space? Mushrooms, along with other psychoactive plants and substances, are a truly important aspect of religious and cultural practices worldwide, and they have been for a very, very long time. I mean, some of the oldest petroglyphs at Tassili Najir, dating back to the Neolithic period, are thought to portray figures identified as shamans, just absolutely covered in mushrooms. Now, it's just amazing to me, yes, again, I recognize it might sound silly, like, oh yeah, UFO and tractor beam looks like a mushroom. And I'm not saying per se that that is what it represents in a concrete way. However, what is intriguing to me is that so often the strong symbology of anomalous encounters tends to come back to some intrinsically human iconography. Finally, yet again, we have the concept of perfect timing. I have to wonder, what, would have happened? Would that event have occurred in that glade if Heinonen and Viljo didn't stop to rest? I mean, time and time again, these encounters just so happen to occur right as people are in the right or very wrong, depending on how you look at it, place at that exact moment. So often you'll see these encounters where people just happen to stop at that point, whether they're on the road or whether they're looking out a window. And that, for some crazy reason, is when the object or the creature or the phantasm or whatever just so happens to be there. Now, in my opinion, personally, it shows that the phenomenon, I believe, is dependent on the observer, not as an exclusive external event actually occurring in space or time, but something that kind of rests right over the boundary between objectivity and subjectivity, capable of, yes, performing kind of objective things like leaving trace evidence or being seen by multiple people, yet again dependent on the witness observing it. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Imjarvi Imp, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat, and also be sure to check out Somewhere in the Skies, audio versions of Just Another Tinfoil Hat, available every other Friday. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.